This is the real challenge. That the president's language was a little non-specific, as was Rutte's, and conflicting. But I will tell you, we can get them there quickly through either of the two routes that were mentioned. The one route of the Europeans transfer their PAC-2, that's a lower level type of Patriot missile, to the Ukrainians, what the Ukrainians could use very easily, and then backfill and order them from the United States to refill the European armory, or the United States could transfer them, and then NATO pays, the European countries pay the United States for the United States to replenish itself. Either of those methods gets them there much quicker than a Ukrainian order from the from a defense industrial based country, which would be years. Either of these cases, he says, could be weeks to months to have missiles and batteries transferring to Ukraine.
Admiral, we're really glad to have you with us today, because before you were on the USS Nimitz, the USS McCampbell, the USS Elliott, the USS Bainbridge, and I can keep going, the Teddy Roosevelt, you were on the National Security Council at the White House, late 90s. And when we look back a couple of years here, how do we rationalize the fact that we've been having this conversation about our defense industrial base for decades, and we really don't have a greater capacity to show for it? Was this not something that you were talking about that many years ago inside the White House?
No, you're exactly right. I think we've got about a 20-year deficit, particularly in our munitions, and that's what we're talking about here, whether it's Patriot missiles here, the Standard missiles the Navy was using to shoot down Houthi rebel cruise missiles, or the offensive weapons that we were using against the Houthis or have used in other locales. We were running at about 25% of the proper level of munitions order. In other words, when we needed 4, we ordered 1. And when you do that over 20 years, you really create a deficit. And worse, you tell the defense industrial base companies, I'm not going to do major orders. And they reduce their ability to produce. So what you've seen over the last 3 years are pretty consistent from the supplemental, the Ukraine supplemental, Taiwan supplemental a couple of years ago, this year's budget and next year's budget, actual investments in the defense industrial base where the United States is contributing to defense industrial base companies like Lockheed and Raytheon and Northrop Grumman to expand their ability, their capacity to produce. They obviously contribute. And so we are beginning to grow our capacity. But this is a 20-year deficit. The only deficit that's worse is the European one, which almost went to zero.
Well, and now, of course, Europeans are trying to step up in their own defense spending category, which is one of the main aims of this administration. That was a point emphasized by Secretary General Rutte in the Oval Office with the president earlier. As we consider the kind of allied capacity, if you will, I also would like to ask you, Admiral, about Russia's capacity, and specifically the supply of weapons that Russia is still getting from countries like North Korea. How should we be considering Russia's ability to continue to replenish its own stocks, continue striking Ukraine, often civilian targets, and how it's matched against the assistance Ukraine is now getting in terms of air defenses?
Well, that's a great question, Kelly, because you're exactly right. Ukraine is fighting 4 countries: Russia, North Korea, Iran, and China. And in fact, Russia today is firing more artillery from North Korea than their own. In other words, the majority of the artillery being used by Russia is North Korean. North Korea gave about 6 million rounds, which is 20 years of U.S. production, to the Russians. Iran has built a Shahed drone factory in Russia. After giving them thousands of their own Shahed drones or selling them, they now have a factory there producing it. That's what's hammering the Ukrainian cities every night. And the third thing is China has been backstopping the economy with increases in imports and exports, but equally importantly, providing the microelectronics that are used in Russian cruise and ballistic missiles. So all 3 of these countries, as axis of authoritarians, are supporting the 4th, Russia, in this fight. And that's who Ukraine's been going against. So that's probably why it's appropriate for the United States and Europe to assist with at least with equipment, but not forces.
It's incredible to consider 4 countries. You know, Bloomberg interviewed the head of Ukrainian military intelligence, Admiral, who said North Korea is now supplying as much as 40% of Russia's ammunition in this war. You mentioned the shells that we're having trouble manufacturing as quickly, but they're prepared at least to send a lot of other stuff: ballistic missiles, artillery systems. Russia, of course, providing money and technology to North Korea in return. What's the weapon system you're most worried about? And could we see them include nukes coming from Pyongyang?
So, well, certainly, not nukes because not that Russia would use them, but they have their own tactical nukes already. But I'm glad you mentioned that because that's something we should always be sensitive to. But the North Korean thing the North Korean weapons that bother me the most are, in fact, the artillery rounds. You're exactly right. But what bothers me even more than those are those Shahed drones. Shahed drones from Iran and the factory that was built in Russia are really putting pressure on the Ukrainian air defense system, and they're causing civilian casualties and damage to critical infrastructure, energy, water, the financial systems of Ukraine are hit every night. And so to me, that Iranian drone and that North Korean artillery are really making a difference in hurting the Ukrainians.
Well, and as you point to the targets that Russia is taking aim at in Ukraine, obviously part of the objective here, Admiral, is to wear on Ukrainian morale. Do you sense that we reach a point where that is effective, where Ukraine's kind of desire to keep prosecuting or defending itself in this war is going to diminish? Is Russia being effective in that regard?
So I don't think so. And here's why I say that. I go to Ukraine every quarter for a couple of weeks to do training with their military and their general staff. And I am convinced the Ukrainians won't lose. That doesn't mean they can push Russia out. It doesn't mean they can recapture Crimea, but they won't lose. They're losing incrementally a kilometer here, a kilometer there of land, but they have the societal resilience to stay in this fight and win. They just need access to weapons, and that's what President Trump gave them today. He gave them access to weapon systems that they need. The one thing I wish he had gone one step further and given them access to some of our offensive weapons again, the ATACMS, long-range artillery. That would have been great because then they could break up Russian formations when they're coming together in Russia by waiting till they're very close to the Ukrainian lines.